January 13th, 1982. A Boeing 737 lifts off Washington National into a wall of snow. In under a minute, it's gone. On board, a father carrying his 2-month-old son to Florida, the boy's mother beside them. A boss flying south with his assistant to deliver layoff news on his own son's 13th birthday. He'd miss it. A federal bank examiner glad to be done with a trip he never wanted. College students, servicemen, families, dozens of strangers who all believed this was just another flight. It wasn't. Flight 90 isn't remembered only for what happened over the Potomac. It's remembered for how it happened. Ordinary decisions made by different people, each with a chance to stop it. Instead, they stacked. Broken equipment nobody flagged. A warning nobody enforced. A delay that kept growing while the danger grew with it. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how a young flight crew, pilots who'd barely flown in weather like this, made a chain of small human calls that investigators would spend months taking apart. But first, you need to know who was on that plane, because almost nobody boarding Flight 90 that day thought they were saying goodbye. Subscribe now if this is your first time here. This story is just getting started. The airport was already behind before Flight 90 reached the gate. A snowstorm had shut Washington National down for nearly 2 hours that morning. By early afternoon, planes sat backed up, waiting on a sky that still hadn't cleared. Inside the terminal, passengers paced, called home, watched the runway through fogged-up windows. One of them, Robert Silberglied, a Smithsonian scientist who'd spent his career studying how butterflies court each other in ultraviolet light invisible to the human eye. Hours earlier, he'd proposed to the woman he loved. Now he was flying south to tell his parents before heading on to fieldwork in Panama. Up front, 2 men ran through their own routine. Captain Larry Wheaton, 34, had spent his entire career at this one airline, climbing from first officer to captain. Beside him, Roger Pettit, 31, a former Air Force fighter pilot who'd traded combat flying for a commercial cockpit. Neither man had logged much time flying jets through weather like this. In the cabin, junior flight attendant Kelly Duncan settled in for what looked like just another delayed departure. Snow at National in January wasn't rare. Planes got de-iced, flights got backed up, people got where they were going. That was how it worked. Not today. Boarding began nearly 2 hours late. It would cost more before takeoff. Joe Stiley and his assistant Nikki Felch made a last-second switch into the smoking section. A small decision. It would matter more than they knew. A few rows back, Jose and Priscilla Tirado buckled in their 2-month-old son, Jason. A short hop south to start over. Jose had a job waiting at his father-in-law's company in Tampa. The aircraft itself wasn't new. Built in 1969, over a decade flying for a different airline under a different name before Air Florida bought it second-hand in 2020. Tens of thousands of flight hours already logged. A seasoned machine on what should have been just another routine leg. After de-icing, the jet pulled into line. Minutes passed, then more. Snow kept falling. Somewhere in that queue, another captain taxied past, looked at Flight 90, and muttered to his crew, "Look at the junk on that airplane." Nobody on Flight 90 heard him. While the plane sat in line, the cabin turned into something closer to a college dorm than a commercial flight. Stiley struck up a conversation with 2 students headed home from winter break. Up and down the plane, military men, families, strangers making small talk to kill a delay nobody asked for.
Near the back, Flight attendants Donna Adams and Marilyn Nichols, 4 years and 3 years on the job, moved through the aisle. A blanket here, a drink there, a reassurance that the wait wouldn't last much longer. Further forward sat Arland Williams, a Federal Reserve Bank examiner from Georgia, glad to have an assignment he'd never much cared for finally behind him. None of it felt urgent. That's the thing about a 2-hour delay in a snowstorm. By the time you're moving again, waiting has become the whole experience. Passengers stopped watching the runway. They watched each other, their books, their kids. What none of them knew, behind the cockpit door, decisions were being made right then about the snow, the wings, how long this aircraft had already sat in weather it wasn't built to sit in. Decisions that would matter more than anything said in that cabin all afternoon. One dramatic failure wouldn't bring this plane down. A dozen quiet ones would. At 2:45, with the runway nearly clear, a de-icing truck rolled up to Flight 90. The nozzle looked like 100 others just like it, but a replacement part fitted somewhere along the way meant the machine couldn't measure what it was actually spraying. The operator dialed in a concentration strong enough to cut through the snow. What came out the nozzle was barely 60% of that strength, and the one gauge that would have caught it had never been installed on this truck. By 3:10, the wings were declared clear. Next problem, the tow tug. Tires spinning uselessly on the ice, no traction, no movement. Captain Wheaton made a call. He'd use the engines themselves in reverse to muscle the plane free. The tug operator warned him it broke company policy. Wheaton did it anyway. For up to 90 seconds, the engines roared in reverse, kicking loose snow and slush back onto the wings they'd just spent 25 minutes clearing. It didn't even work. The plane still wouldn't budge. A second tug, this one with chains, finally pulled Flight 90 free. From their seats, most passengers barely noticed. A few glanced at the swirl of white near the engines, decided it was nothing, went back to their books, their conversations, their kids. It was 3:35, already an hour past departure. The plane still hadn't reached the runway. As Flight 90 taxied into the back of the line, the crew ran their post-engine start checklist. The same list, same order they'd run hundreds of times. Engine anti-ice, off. One word, no pause. The internal heaters, built to keep the engine's sensors from icing over, would stay dark for the rest of the flight. The line inched forward. Snow kept falling, settling right back onto wings the ground crew had cleared less than half an hour earlier. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The aircraft barely moved. Inside, the wait had turned restless. Priscilla Tirado kept baby Jason bundled against the cold off the window. Joe Stiley checked his watch. He wasn't missing an hour of his son's birthday anymore. He was missing the evening. Ahead sat a New York Air DC-9, its engines throwing visible heat into the cold air. Watching the snow build outside his window, Wheaton eased Flight 90 forward, closing the gap until they sat almost inside the other jet's exhaust, hoping the warm air might do what the de-icing truck hadn't. Beside him, First Officer Pettit noticed something else. The heat wasn't just reaching the wings, it seemed to be reaching their own instruments, nudging the readings in ways he couldn't explain. Neither man stopped to ask why. 49 minutes after leaving the gate, Flight 90 finally reached the front of the line. At 4:59, Flight 90 got its clearance. Wheaton lined up on runway 36, snow still drifting sideways past the windows, and pushed the throttles forward. Something was wrong from the first second. The engines spooled up quieter than they should have, slower to build, like the plane wasn't fully committing to leave the ground. Pettit caught it first. God, look at that thing. He watched the gauges climb toward numbers that looked almost right. That don't seem right, does it? Wheaton didn't slow down to check. The readings sat close enough to a routine, fuel-saving takeoff that nothing on the panel screamed for attention. Just two numbers a few notches off, buried inside a range both men had seen 100 times. Wheaton kept his hands on the controls. The takeoff continued. In the cabin, nobody caught the exchange up front. Kelly Duncan, buckled into her jump seat, felt the engines push harder than usual and chalked it up to the delay, a heavier plane, cold-soaked, impatient to leave the ground. A few rows up, Robert Silberglied settled back, already rehearsing how he'd tell his parents the news. Outside, the runway markers blurred past faster than they should have, this far into the roll. The far end of the pavement was already sliding into view. Flight 90 still hadn't left the ground. After 45 long seconds and just over a mile of runway, nearly 2,000 feet more than a 737 this size should need, Flight 90 broke free of the ground. It should have felt like relief. It didn't last long enough, too. Seconds after liftoff, a rattling buzz filled the cockpit, the stick shaker, warning both men the wings were losing their grip on the air. Wheaton pushed the nose down to keep flying speed. Come on, forward, forward, just barely climb. In the cabin, the illusion broke. The engines strained unevenly instead of settling into a steady climb. Priscilla Tirado gripped Jason tighter than she had all afternoon. Joe Stiley, seated beside Nicky Felch in the smoking section they'd switched into, almost as an afterthought, felt the floor tilt in a way no landing or takeoff ever had. Up front, the numbers on Pettit's side kept sliding the wrong way. Investigators would later calculate the crew had roughly 15 seconds after liftoff to push the throttles forward and climb out of it. Those 15 seconds passed with the throttles exactly where they'd been since the runway. "Larry, we're going down, Larry. I know it." Those were the last words either man would ever say to each other. At 4:01 that afternoon, 3/4 of a mile from the runway they'd just left, Flight 90 stopped climbing for good. At 4:01, still short of the altitude a normal climb should have reached by then, Flight 90 ran out of sky. The jet came down across the northbound span of the 14th Street Bridge, clipping through rush-hour traffic backed up bumper to bumper in the snow. Several cars and a truck took the impact meant for the runway. The fuselage broke apart across the width of the bridge. What was left of it dropped over the far side and slammed into the frozen Potomac. The river swallowed it mostly instantly. What didn't sink stayed afloat only because a sheet of ice, thick enough to walk on that January, briefly held the wreckage up before giving way. Joe Stiley came into water so cold it felt like being struck rather than submerged, the cabin already torn open near his seat. He found Nicky Felch beside him and told her to grab his leg. Somewhere close, a handful of others surfaced the same way, gasping, disoriented, fighting to find something solid enough to hold. Above them, commuters stopped mid-drive on the very bridge the plane had just hit. They stepped out into the snow to stare at a scene that made no sense yet, a passenger jet broken into sections, half swallowed by a river that was freezing over as they watched. 4:01 in the afternoon, rush hour, the nation's capital, and nobody on that bridge, in that water, or anywhere else yet knew how many people had just been asked to survive the unsurvivable, or how many wouldn't get the chance. In the water, Survival came down to who still had the strength to hold on and who kept giving that strength away. Arland Williams surfaced near 5 other passengers, all clinging to floating wreckage in water cold enough to shut a body down in minutes. When the park police helicopter lowered its line, Williams passed it to someone else. Then again, then 3 more times after that. By the 6th pass, he'd already slipped under. One of 78 lives lost that afternoon, and the only one investigators say drowned rather than died on impact. On the bridge above, a bystander named Lenny Skutnik watched a rescue line lose its grip on a woman barely holding on and jumped into the river himself to drag her out. Her name was Priscilla Tirado. She survived. Her husband, Jose, did not. Their 2-month-old son, Jason, was the last body recovered, found by divers in the wreckage 10 days later. The NTSB spent months tracing it back to one quiet mistake. With the engine's own de-icers switched off, ice had crept into the sensors that measured their power, feeding the crew a number that looked like full thrust and wasn't. Nobody in that cockpit ever saw a warning telling them to stop. If you were in that cockpit, would you have caught it in time? Tell us below. If you love stories like this one, subscribe. This channel posts a story like this almost every week. Now watch this next one. Its ending is even more shocking.